one single employee lawsuit can take them out of business. They go right from operating and being an employer to being back looking for a job. And so figuring out ways to give people more preventative medicine, which we do not do in law. Let's just be honest. Giving a little more preventative medicine will save not just the entrepreneur themselves, but guess what else? I think it saves the court system, which is packed full of people who didn't have a contract or maybe had a crappy contract and don't know how to fix it.
Today on LawNext, how LegalZoom is working to build better contracts for small businesses. We'll speak with Chas Rampenthal, General Counsel at LegalZoom, and Ken Adams, a lawyer well known for his blog Adams on Contract Drafting and his ABA book, A Manual of Style for Contract Drafting, about a project they're working on together called Pulse. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to LawNext, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to our conversation, let's hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, on to this week's interview. Chas Rampenthal, welcome to LawNext.
Hey, thanks, Bob. I'm really glad to be here.
And you have the honor of being our first ever returning guest on this show, because you were on a show that we posted way back in August, not long after we first launched this podcast. So
right
thanks
on.
for doing that.
I remember it fondly. It was a good time. That was a very interesting time in LegalZoom's life as well.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. And Ken Adams, welcome to you.
Hello, Bob. Pleasure to be here.
So this is a little bit different sort of a show for me in the sense that I'm not entirely clear what we're talking about today. I've gotten some hints at it, but in a way you're kind of announcing some stuff. We're discussing some stuff that hasn't really been talked a lot about publicly so far. I don't think. Starting with the news, Ken, that you now work for LegalZoom, right?
I'm an employee. What a shock.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. And indeed, as we've discussed, you were an intermediary. It was after I saw your podcast with Chas that I thought, perhaps Chas is someone I could have a chat with. So I asked you to arrange an introduction. You did that, and away we went.
Yeah, and Bob, it just so happened that the timing was kind of it was kind of fortuitous. And where we're going with this is I think a lot of people have known, and I've discussed it before, that LegalZoom has been looking for ways to really kind of expand the types of services, the types of products that it can offer to the consumer, to the small business. And one of the real kind of gaping holes that I've seen is this idea of moving from offering forms, kind of more static or even slightly dynamic forms, to really offering more dynamic contracting. And I think that's one of these. It's just a real obvious need that if you talk to any, especially if you talk to any lawyer, you talk to any entrepreneur on the street and you say, hey, what's something that almost every, small business at least needs? And they'd say, wow, they really need access to a lawyer to get these kind of basic business contracts up, drafted, and in their arsenal. And that's one of the things that a lot of them kind of do poorly. There's just not a lot of options out there other than, kind of doing it yourself or going to a bit of the more full service. And so it was interesting that we were in the middle of starting this Pulse initiative, which is actually an actual company. It's a subsidiary of LegalZoom, with that eye toward offering more and more services to maybe initially the small business owner and eventually the consumer.
So yeah, and I can see the need for that. I mean, it was kind of funny because as I was thinking about having the two of you on this show, I was seeming to remember that Ken sometimes in the past hadn't always been all that kind to LegalZoom contracts in his blog and in his writing about it. I saw Ken back in 2012. You talked about you had a post called LegalZoom's Business Contracts: Commoditizing Mediocrity.
Yeah.
So what's What do you see as your role here in now becoming part of LegalZoom?
Well, in 2012, that was just my usual cruel to be kind shtick. It had real fondness behind it, I'm sure. But
Yeah. Well, and it wasn't
it's
LegalZoom that you picked on. It wasn't only LegalZoom that you.
no,
That's right.
I'm a pretty indiscriminate picker.
Yeah, I'd like to say we were in good company with like General Electric and a bunch of others.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's to LegalZoom's credit and Chaz's credit that they were willing to put that all behind them and start a new conversation. And it's one that I've been looking to have for quite a while, because I started rooting around in contract language when I was a foot soldier in big law, and somewhat to my surprise, I found it turned into a 20+ year process. But pretty much at the outset, I had the idea that it was not an end to itself, a comprehensive set of guidelines for clear and effective contract language, but it was a means to an end. So it's sort of as if, okay, so I said, all right, we need this comprehensive set of guidelines. So I started work on it. And now 20+ years later, I say, oh, well, that's pretty much done now. So now we can start building. And I've always had an eye open for possible partners in that area, but I've found that pretty much the entire world, the law firms, the company law departments, and the vendors are all, they're all riding the copy and paste train. They're all sort of committed to recycling the current dysfunction, because with change comes considerable pain. So I pretty much exhausted the obvious avenues. Then I thought, LegalZoom. One thing LegalZoom is known for is perhaps having a certain moxie, a willingness to do what is perhaps not the obvious choice. And furthermore, I thought that there was a good chance that they were less committed to the status quo. They hadn't invested in some vast repository of traditional contract language, and so we're willing to give it a fresh take. And that turned out to, in fact, be the case.
So where once you saw some, perhaps your words, commoditizing mediocrity, you saw an opportunity for getting beyond that mediocrity and doing something a little more innovative.
Sure. The commodity part is great. Contract drafting is precedent driven.
Right.
So that offers the potential for capturing all sorts of economies that you don't have with other kinds of legal writing, or is not, at least not as readily. But you need to start out with quality, with expertise. And
absolutely,
and that's what Pulse is and Chaz are willing to do.
Yeah. So Chaz, what is Pulse? So Pulse is in part an ABS in the UK,
yes,
right? But it's something more than that.
Well, yeah. So where this comes back, and you'd have to jump back a couple of years as LegalZoom was moving into and considering what we would like to do going forward with the alternative business structures in the United Kingdom, with this new ability to have a law firm model where you could invest in technology, you could invest in people, you could kind of put efficiencies into the mix that didn't typically exist in more traditional big law, or especially even small law. And what we've decided is that while serving serving the community there in the United Kingdom, very important, right? We've got we're doing business formations and conveyancing and a host of other services there. We also took a look from I took a look from LegalZoom side and said, you know what we really should be doing? We should be focusing on the future of the LegalZoom customer, the LegalZoom small business customer, that consumer. At some point in time, they're going to be looking for more, and we need to be creating more. But as you've known from other podcasts and other interviews I've given, Bob, we also see that more is going to necessitate the involvement of lawyers in more traditional roles and lawyers in maybe new and innovative roles. And so I took upon myself to say, if I had my choice to get a cadre of lawyers that were working inside of LegalZoom to build a system that we could then maybe port out as a platform of people and technology to lawyers, or if I could do that in an independent law firm, right, an alternative business structure that still was funded by LegalZoom, still had its hand, in the process, but you could separate that idea of the legal independence and the judgment of the legal professional from the business model itself, which is exactly what an alternative business structure does, that we could do a better job of showing the world that this isn't an alternative to law. This is law. It's just law reimagined. It's law better. It's law faster, law more affordable. And guess what? It is actually not, but it's better quality. Not even on pari passu, it's actually better. And that's the idea of getting Ken. And until I knew that he might even have an inkling toward doing this, my biggest challenge was, how am I going to make this better than what's out there? How am I going to make it more clear, more effective, more efficient, more understandable, the contract language? And that's where this kind of that fortuitous call or the email that you dropped. And I was just like, wait a minute, this guy might want to do something with us. This is a really perfect time for this.
So to throw your own words back at you that you sent me and you used in an email to me, you want to bring together expertise and technology, and
absolutely,
and maybe even more of the expertise.
Absolutely, and I think that look, we can see the things that wow the consumer, and let's just be honest. Most small business owners are not wowed by contract language. The actual words on the paper don't make happy. they don't dance around at a new notice provision or a choice of law. But when that contract has to go to bat, right? When it ends up in a court or you end up in a dispute, that's when they see the massive value in a well-drafted contract. And oftentimes, like, you take a look at everything from a will or a trust, or take a look at a lot of things that lawyers do. It's not until there's a challenge that's met until you actually see the value and the quality of the work done. And what LegalZoom, we've realized, is that we are in the business of, we have a lot of consumers. We have a lot of potential clients for a law firm. And that volume and the necessity to productize, and I don't like to use the word commodity. I like to use the word like to make it productized, is going to be something that's necessary. But you cannot productize or commoditize mediocrity, because in the end, it will catch up to you. So the only way to make this work is to have something on the front end that wows, an interface, a technology, an automation, a quickness, but also to have something on the back end that wows. It's going to, that when you put this in front of another lawyer, or in front of, whether it's in a negotiation or you put it in front of a judge at a court, this is someone that says this language is unassailable. It's clear. It's concise. It's understandable. There is no way that you could misinterpret this contract. And while I know that's a high bar to set, and it might even be an impossible bar, it doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for it. And I've told this story before, Bob, my dad was a small business owner. If he could understand the legal contracts that I had written for him, he wouldn't have needed me. He could have done a lot of this work on his own, and he could have saved himself when he got his own lawyer before I was an attorney. He could have saved himself a lot of worry, a lot of money. And he also could have saved himself a lot of headache when he got into disputes over ambiguous clauses. And so I take a look at this marriage of the technology and the marketing and the brand that's going to get the consumer to say, I trust this, but then fulfill the promise on the back end, which is, oh, you were right to trust it. It's phenomenal. It's amazing. This is the contract that you're going to be, that we hope can set the standard.
So I understand. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Sorry, excuse me. The role of expertise is a slightly tricky one, in that you have to have the expertise, and I think it's also important to be seen to have the expertise.
Yeah.
When it comes to contract language, I think if anyone is going to be using technology to make contracts more efficient, they're going to have a set of guidelines. And realistically, my book is the only set of guidelines out there. But beyond that, when I see people working with contracts, I ask myself, who's behind that? And generally, you don't know who's behind that. It's this kind of mystery meat expertise, and I don't trust that, and I don't see why anyone should trust that. You want to know what the ingredients are that you're buying.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, it's a particular law firm. I mean, you may not know the individuals at the firm, but you know at least the firm that's behind the set of documents or something like that, right?
Yes, though I think that's perhaps that's not always the case when you have a technology that's being broadly offered. It's just right. they develop their own content, and also. As Chaz have noted, have a long track record of pointing out serious dysfunction in contracts produced by the most exalted of names. So a big name by itself doesn't connote quality. There has to be something more to it.
Right. And Absolutely. If I could jump in there, I mean, that is the reason why. I mean, when we take a look at, look, before you introduced me to Ken, I obviously read the blog post that kind of not chopped down a little bit of the forms that LegalZoom. We've had, kind of some basic fill in the blank forms and instructions. But also I saw him, I saw him taken to task, the GEs of the world, some of and then the other thing was, when I look at my own legal team, which I think they're, I'd hold them up against almost any other legal team. They're phenomenal at their transactional work, the litigation work, the regulatory work that we do. You know whose book is sitting on the vice president of corporate legal's bookshelf? It's Ken's, right? And when I said, "Hey, we need to prep up an agreement for him. We're gonna do testing. We're gonna see if he can help us work some stuff out." He goes, "Wait a minute, is this the same Ken Adams? Like you know him?" He kind of gushed a little bit. It's saying like, "Wow." I mean, it's like I reference his book on a nearly a daily basis. Like he's the place I go to when I read someone else's contract and go, wait a minute, why are they saying it this way? Yeah. So you take like I said, 2 decades of experience looking not just at a clause, but at the individual words in the clause and going, why is that wheretofore in this thing? Why is that nevertheless in here? Does it need to be here? Why do you say represent and warrant? I mean, you could scour the globe and no one has written as much about represents and warrants as Ken. And the fact of the matter is you look at these things and you say concise, understandable, clear language. It doesn't always mean that the concept itself is going to be simple. Some things in law are complex. But if you can boil that down to the least common denominator that works, you can actually, with technology, explain complex things to people in a very easy way through notes, through imaging, right? There's lots of ways that we can take a complex issue, make the language simple enough, and then explain the rest away. So I have this kind of thing in my head saying that the first thing it should be clear, it should be concise, it should be comprehensive, it should be understandable. But if not, it needs to at least be explainable. And if you can do all those things inside of a contract engine, maybe from the palm of your hand on a phone, as you're a small business owner and you're getting ready to do that next big thing, you're getting ready to, talk to an investor about possibly coming in, or a new employee or a vendor, and you have that right in the palm of your hand, and you know that I'm about ready to enter into an agreement, and it's a good agreement. I can count on it. I think that's something that we should be aspiring to, and it's really what we set our hearts out to build.
So how do you take that expertise and turn it into a product? I mean, what is it that you're trying to build?
Well, what we're trying to build is we're trying to build a small business ecosystem. I mean, this is one part of it, and it's an integral part of it. If you take a look back and you step back and you look at, talk to an entrepreneur, that person just getting started. Maybe they have an employer or two. Maybe they have a taco truck. Maybe they're a florist. It doesn't really matter. But if you speak to them and you say, I wonder if you look at it from the lawyer's eyes, you know what you're always going to see. They need legal help, right? If you look at it through an accountant's eyes, they're always going to need tax help. If you look at it through an HR person's eyes, they need to make sure their policies are really good and their employment stuff's right. If you look at it through someone else's eyes, right? Insurance, they're underinsured. The problem is that no one's really looking at it from the entrepreneur's eyes except the entrepreneur. So what we need to build out and what we need to figure out is how do we get together all the expertise of these things into one system? Because when you ask the entrepreneur, they just have a business problem. They don't have a legal problem. They don't have a tax problem or an HR problem or an insurance problem. They have a business problem and they want someone to solve it. And if we can cut out a chunk of that, which may be the horrificness of most, getting a contract in place, which can sometimes takes weeks or months, even for a simple agreement with the lawyers going around and battling their forms out. If we could take that and make it more simple, make it affordable, make it understandable, that's just one big problem that you take away. Now, if we can take a look at some of the other problems, well, what would they look like? And so the idea here, if we step back to the 30,000 foot view, is how do we make an ecosystem where small business owners feel that they can thrive without constantly worried that they're going to trip over something they can't see? And then give them tools so that they don't have to worry about those things and they can focus on the thing that they care about, which is their business. The taco truck owner's business is making great tacos. It's not ensuring they have the proper business license. But guess what? If they don't have the proper business license, they can't make great tacos. So it's a vicious circle. We got to try and make sure that these people are protected.
And if I could leap in, serving small business is interesting in a couple of respects. First, in terms of doing something new, we already know that LegalZoom is prepared for novelty. One nice thing about the small business market is they don't have, they haven't invested in the status quo. They're starting out. They need help,
right? And
we can give them contracts that do the job effectively without their second guessing them in terms of, we have this traditional stuff on hand. Why don't we use that? But at the same time, it's a contract for small business resembles a contract for larger businesses. It's a matter of just not including various bells and whistles that are suited to the bigger business, and also just realistically, you are going to take an extra step to make things simpler to the extent you can, but it's a balancing act because you can have a small software shop that feels that its intellectual property is vital. So it can be a small business that wants to afford the maximum protection to its business objectives. So it is going to be a balancing act in that regard. Chaz and I are going to have an ongoing discussion just to make sure that we are targeting it appropriately.
That's absolutely right.
Is the goal to develop something that helps small businesses with kind of the routine standard contracts that they encounter, on a regular basis, or something, I don't know, more custom?
Yeah. So I think it's going to be, we're going to start out with one and then hopefully migrate into more. I've not been shy in saying that I think the future of LegalZoom is going to be trying to find a way, an effective, efficient, great way to take lawyers, arm them with great technology, arm them with information, arm them with the ability to very quickly understand, adapt, and help solve the needs of the small business and the consumer, And we all know that LegalZoom is, pretty much the largest, it's the largest name brand that's out there, getting these consumers, getting these small businesses in the doors. We often start their business, but then once their business is up and started, look, you can get advice through a legal plan. Sure. You can get, some compliance, you can get a few other things, but the stuff that most businesses really value going forward, like I said, contracts, really, heavy compliance, that advice component on a, someone that gets to know their business is just something that, we have to be straight where our strengths and weaknesses are. That's something LegalZoom has not spent a lot of time doing, because it was busy, and rightfully so, building a brand, getting people to understand how important it is to take these first steps as a small business, or to get that very first will drafted when you're just starting out your family. Those are things that are really important. But now we also want to continue moving on past that and say, well, how can we figure out a way to both provide the great tools, build great tools, and get great lawyers onto a platform so they can start taking some of the things when it's not the right fit for a and I don't want to use the cookie cutter, because nothing we're going to do is cookie cutter, but for one of the do it yourself contracts, and for them to say, no, we can take that and use it as a base. And with just, instead of taking 2 or 3 hours, we can do it in 20 minutes, and we can customize it because we already know your business. We know what your goals are. We already have a standard set of language because we've customized other contracts. Now that we've had this quick chat and we can go forward, bam, it's done, and give people options, right? The option to do it themselves and get some lawyer advice, do it themselves, get some lawyers, some custom drafted, or maybe even eventually a fully custom drafted agreement from scratch. I think everything's on the table. And I think the most important thing is giving an entrepreneur at the beginning, and later maybe a consumer, a feeling that they like there is a place to go. That where they, it's Cheers, right? It's where everyone knows my name. It's where they care about my business, and it's where I know I can afford it. I know it's going to be great, and I know it's going to be easy, right? And this is what people are looking for. Starting a business is climbing Mount Everest, and you shouldn't do that by yourself. You shouldn't do it without training. You shouldn't do it without a Sherpa or oxygen or equipment or supplies. And the fact of the matter is it's a massive undertaking to start a small business. And if you can load people up with the information and the tools and the technology and the people to help them, I believe, and this might be a bold statement, that we could see more small businesses succeed than fail. And that is, to the son of a small business owner, is something that makes me smile. I would love to say that with the tools that we're building right now, you are more likely to have a better business. That's awesome.
We'll continue with our conversation with Chas and Ken in just a moment. But first, let's take a break to hear from the sponsors who generously support LawNext. And now, let's continue this week's interview. So it's Chas, you and I have talked a number of times over the years about your vision, and I don't know what this is still how you would describe your vision, but you've kind of analogized it to the healthcare system. The idea that somebody comes in, at a sort of entry level with a problem, and the problem is assessed, and the appropriate way to deal with that problem and the appropriate people or skill set or whatever is kind of triaged, and people either move up in levels of expertise or not, depending on what they need. It sounds like that's similar to what you're talking about here. The idea of maybe this is a DIY product. Maybe they need a little bit of custom help or a little bit of guidance, or maybe they need full blown guidance from a lawyer.
And again, I think that's right. The idea of a continuum of help is super important. But the one thing that we all know is that whether you're talking about the medical, system, the healthcare system, you're talking about the legal system, and that is, and I've made the statement. Our CEO John Suss made the statement that medicine without a doctor somewhere in it is not real medicine, and law without a lawyer in it somewhere is not real law. And so if you take a look at what LegalZoom does, it gives you that continuum, but you always know that when you need the lawyer can be there, whether that's an independent lawyer through LegalZoom, whether it's someone that LegalZoom kind of helps you find, whether it's someone that is a part of a network. It doesn't really matter. What really matters is that you feel like you're taken care of. And I view this the same way. I think there are tasks, and I come from, my dad was a contractor. I've done some home building for him. There are some things that I'm comfortable doing around my house myself. There are some things I am not. There are some things in the middle where I thought I was confident until I got shocked. Then I knew I wasn't confident. And I think what we're talking about here is having the guidance all the way through so that before you get that shock, you've got someone on your shoulder tapping you going, you know what? You may not want to put that screwdriver there, right? And if you could find a way to do that for law, it is not about, because here's the deal. Law is about taking people who have stepped into potholes and cleaning them up. What we're talking about here is getting people not to step in potholes in the first place, right? Not to trip themselves up on the silly little things, because that's stepping in a pothole. You're from Boston, Bob. It's annoying, right? But it's not necessarily life ending for you. It's just really, really annoying for your day. And a lot of these small things are things that don't end your business, but man, they make that day suck for you. But guess what? There are a few things that do end your business. I've looked around and read somewhere there, when I talk to entrepreneurs who have 2 or 3 employees, one single employee lawsuit can take them out of business. They go right from operating and being an employer to being back looking for a job. And so figuring out ways to give people more preventative medicine, which we do not do in law. Let's just be honest. Giving a little more preventative medicine will save not just the entrepreneur themselves, but guess what else? I think it saves the court system, which is packed full of people who didn't have a contract or maybe had a crappy contract and don't know how to fix it. And if they all would have had something like this up front, who knows? Maybe they could have figured out a way to say, wow, this is pretty clear. You're right. I do owe you that $3,000. And that's it, right? And maybe that's a pipe dream, and maybe it's a decade or 2 or 10 away. But the point is if we don't start somewhere, we're not going anywhere. And I think this dovetails right back into what Ken's doing, which is we could sit around and we could find some contract language that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, which honestly, in my view, means it was so bad that it had to be litigated. It was so ambiguous that it went to an appeals court and then finally maybe to a Supreme Court. And then they said, yeah, you know what? That's the archetype we should use for all our contracts now. That is a ridiculous statement. We should be doing it better than just the best of the worst. Right. And I don't say that to ding any one lawyer, but I probably have. And the point of the matter is we should be starting afresh. We should be starting with something new, and it might be risky, but if it's done right, that risk is going to be worth it because it's going to be better access and better education and more information to the consumer. And I think that's always a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can go to LegalZoom now and get any number of contracts, as we talked about earlier. So Ken, what's your vision for how this is different? How do you take that expertise that you've developed and put that into a practical, usable form?
Well, let's see. I have the guidelines, but the awkward reality is that combining using the guidelines to create quality substance is a separate and ultimately a harder task. So in a way, the past 20 plus years work has been the easy part. Now we have to concern ourselves not with how we say whatever we're going to say in a contract, but what we say. So that is an enormous task. Obviously, we start small, and I anticipate that at every step we're going to have subject matter experts helping us. I have some modest subject matter expertise, but I'm not willing to offer something to the wider world without input from, I've been fortunate to have input over the years from many readers with comments and suggestions and questions. That'll keep going. But also I've enlisted subject matter experts to help with particular contracts. I have in mind formalizing that with Pulse in terms of having editorial boards to help with certain kinds of contracts. So we are confident that what we're saying is relevant to the transaction. It reflects whatever jurisdiction quirks are involved, and it says everything as clearly as it can. and offers whatever relevant guidance there is using what Pulse technology has to offer.
I mean, it sounds like what you're talking about is not just building a better set of forms, but building forms that are more reactive or more customizable, I guess.
Well, yeah,
is that fair to
the
say, or-
the idea of customizing templates is not a new one. It is the basis of any rational kind of drafting. I spent the better part of a year creating the confidentiality agreement of my dreams, one that you can create by answering up to 80 questions, to the horror of most people. The idea of 80 questions on an NDA is a little shocking, but that just simply reflects that you can make a contract as simple or as complex as your needs require. So yes, the customizing is a core idea, but it has not been implemented well. I mean, the technology behind it is not glamorous or anything. It's quite basic, but it is a vehicle for expertise, and it's the expertise that has been lacking. So obviously for Pulse, I'm not going to be building some grand 80 question edifices. Our needs starting out will be modest in terms of customizing, but what customizing there is, we'll offer it in a seamless sort of way, explain the choices in a straightforward way. So it is ultimately not a laborious process, and you will customize things to reflect the needs of the user. If they want things more complex, then they're willing to take on more questions. If they don't need that, then it's going to be simpler. It's going to be tailored to their needs.
And I think that's absolutely right. If you take a look at what Ken said, and I think it's a brilliant example. You can have an NDA, you can have 80 options, and those 80 options will cover. I would guess, I bet Ken would say 100%, but if I'm just being generous and say 99% of what most people would need in a non-disclosure agreement, that's phenomenal. And if you take a look and say, you know what, with 4 questions, we can cover 40, 50%. With 7 questions, we can do 70%. With 10, we can do 90. Guess what? That's pretty much all you need to cover what most small businesses need. And if you also give them that, hey, by the way, if you're also thinking of X, like for instance, adding, I don't know, some non-compete language or whatever, this is not for you. And you need to tap this button here. You need to start chatting with a lawyer. You need to get connected with an expert on this. You need a custom drafted agreement. Giving them that, again, the choice, but also giving them that option up front, which is, hey, if you need this done quickly and you know exactly what this is supposed to cover, we're going to give you the tool. You can get it done in 30 seconds. And literally not just get it done, you can get it done. You can share it with the other side. You can sign it, store it, get it, like have an entire system of contract management, not just getting the contract, but executing the contract, making sure the other side has it, storing it, and then understanding maybe when it expires, when it needs to be renewed. We're talking about a system that will just kind of hum along in the background with hopefully lawyers in a way that we can do it in a regulatorily effective and efficient and legal way, so that we can figure out a way to say, when a small business needs more than just the tool, they have a place they can go to get advice. And when they need more than advice, they can actually get that person on a phone, on a desktop, or on a mobile to help them custom, do something more custom. And again, it's that continuum, that ecosystem of, it doesn't matter what your problem is. We have a solution for you. When your problems are simple, we have simple solutions. When your problems get a little more complex, we have the way to give you that advice. When you need something more than that, we have a way for you to get the help you need. And if you think about this, just like when I joined LegalZoom now 15 and a half years ago, when LegalZoom came to me and said, Chaz, can you do X? right? Can you help draft this partnership agreement, or can you help draft an affiliate agreement? I could look at that and say, that's in my wheelhouse. I'll do that for you. And I do it. And if they came to me and said, can you manage some trademark litigation and go to court? You know what? That was not in my wheelhouse. But you know what I did? I found the right firm. I vetted them. I made sure that they were right. And then I made sure that LegalZoom had really high quality work whenever they had representation. And I think when a small business is looking for in a lawyer, in an accountant, in an HR professional, in an insurance agent and the like, they're looking for people who just get them and their business. People who say, I know what you need. Sure, I'm an insurance agent. The more insurance I sell, the more money I make. But I know what you do, and I'm not going to oversell you insurance just to make a little more money. I don't need to, because I've got hundreds or thousands of clients. And the thing that's most important is making them happy, giving them the right amount of protection. And I think if we could get that as a baseline, we start getting businesses not about doing these things, about the fact that they don't have to do these things. And then, what Ken and I have been talking about is not only starting there, but continuing to go and starting to set out standards of contract language and standards of contract examples, right, for particular industries or particular problems, such that these people know that they're not just getting, like I said, something cookie cutter that might be good for them, but something literally that is tailored for them with technology. And again, that's going to take time. It's aspirational, absolutely. But with a start of what we're doing, going through, testing it, making sure it doesn't break, making sure it's good, expanding it, scaling it, getting information, data, especially with the scale of what LegalZoom can offer, we think this is something that could really be transformative to the small business.
And is it fair to describe, essentially you're talking about building an expert system. Is that a fair description of it, or?
You know what? I think some people would probably describe it as that. Yeah. It's from the, especially when you think of it from our perspective, right? As the people who have seen legal technology and people who have dealt with these issues before, that's exactly what you consider it. But, an expert system, as you know, has many, many parts to it. And there's the part where the expert says, I've given you the expertise you need to do it. And then there's parts where, you need to kind of turn it over and let the expert really help. And again, I think what we're really looking at here is a system where the business owner initially, like I said, maybe one day that family can come in and say, they got me, right? I have a problem and they already got it. I already know they're going to have a solution before the problem hits. And they're looking out for me. They're giving me advice and guidance to keep me out of that danger. And when the danger comes that none of us saw, they've got a way to help me work through it. And in the end, that's really all that we can kind of ask for. I mean, you can't, lawyers can't make businesses ethical, and they can't make accountants can't make people, not cheat on their tax returns. But what you can do is you can give them the information to let them know you shouldn't be doing that. You can look over their returns and go, boy, that looks shady. You can do what TurboTax does and say, you're in the red for, the likelihood of being audited based on what you've done. And you can give people some choices to say, you should rethink that, or maybe should pop on the phone with one of our accountants or our enrolled agents, and you should talk about this issue so we can get that thing down into the green. And honestly, if we had something like that for law, people would be ecstatic. But it building that system is not 2 months. It's not 2 years. It might be 2 decades to get that thing done.
And just to go back to this Pulse, the entity that you're working on to develop this, that's, if I understand it, Pulse is registered in the UK, and is also, you said you also have an office in the United States, and you're doing sort of development
Yes.
under the Pulse name. So does Pulse become a brand here essentially? Does what you're building come out branded as Pulse, or does it come out as part of LegalZoom, or have you not figured that out yet? Is it too early to say that?
It's too early to say. I think, look, if I had a, my with my LegalZoom, and it's really weird because I am wearing 2 hats now. I am kind of intimately and very regularly involved in the management of Pulse. I'm a qualified solicitor. I'm doing work for that. I'm also still the general counsel of LegalZoom. Those things are our goals are very, very aligned, and it makes that really easy. I can see, look, the LegalZoom has spent more to develop the LegalZoom brand than any other law firm, legal system, legal whatever solution in the universe. And there is nothing that I think a tiny little subsidiary like Pulse can do to change that. And I think that we don't want to change that.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that Pulse on its own might acquire one day its own brand of doing some subset of things, but there is absolutely no desire to do anything to rock the boat with the mothership of LegalZoom. They are not just our funding, but they are the reason we know the problems that we want to solve exist is because LegalZoom has seen those problems. I have seen those problems as LegalZoom's general counsel. We understand, from the times back in UPL where we were trying to tell people the difference between a trademark and a copyright. It's really hard to do that and steer them to the right path without committing the unauthorized practice of law. And we've always known at some point in time, we need to shift this balance so that we can continue adding value to the business owner and the consumer by getting lawyers into the mix. We've done that. Now we think we can go deeper. Now in the UK, they've made it possible to go deeper through an ABS structure where a company like LegalZoom can own, invest, and really build up a system. But also we're already seeing in California and in Utah and other states, people are talking about it right now. They're talking about, well, maybe we should start looking at something like this. And so there's a part of me that's thinking at some point in time, either I'm going to build it and we're going to talk about how awesome it is for all the people in the UK and how they're getting all this help and it's affordable and great. And maybe by then people in the US will say, well, gee, maybe we should give our people some of that stuff too. Or maybe they're just going to be a little more proactive and say, it's been a decade now. Cats and dogs aren't living together in the United Kingdom. There's a mass rampant, lawyers out, kind of screwing consumers over. As a matter of fact, solicitor complaints are down. The satisfaction of their customers and clients is up. Prices are going down. Maybe they're onto something. That doesn't mean it needs to be exact. Doesn't mean it needs to be the same way. But maybe we should consider the fact that right now law does, in its traditional form, two things. It says you cannot invest with money except your own money, and you cannot invest in people and give them equity unless they have a law degree and are licensed. And those two things shrink the possibility of innovation so much that most of the innovation you see, Bob, most of the people you have on your show, they're not lawyers in partnerships that are all pooling their money together and building new computer systems or new software systems. They are jumping out. They're the Atriums of the world, the LegalZooms of the world, right? They're the law geeks of the world. Those are the people that are out there, or the legal sifters of the world. They're the ones that are out there doing it all because they've realized that the only way you can solve this problem is with people and money. And right now, law is strangling people and money from itself. So I'm really hopeful that at one point in time, we can see a shift, whether it's inside of APRL, the professional responsibility lawyers, whether it's inside of a state bar or the ABA itself. But at some point in time, this is going to come to a head.
Yep. Well, we, as you say, it's a theme we've talked about a lot on this show, and I mean, just last week we had the Pangea 3 people on talking about their acquisition by EY and talking about a lot of the same themes. Hey, I know you guys both got to jump, and we're running out of time. I just want to, Ken, do you have any last words? Any final words you'd like to say before I cut you off here on our recording?
Well, I'm just considering how Chaz has that panoramic view of the legal landscape. Me, I got my nose to the grindstone. I'm contract language guy, contract content guy, and I'm delighted to have a platform where I can apply that kind of unencumbered with the forces of inertia. So it'll be exciting to see where it goes.
I would say, Bob, just give us a little time. We'll be back on here when we're ready to show you something fun.
Well, I like that concept of Ken being unencumbered by the forces of inertia, and so thus unencumbered, we will check back with you guys in a while and see what you've been doing. I really appreciate both of you taking the time to be on the show today. We've been talking with Chas Rampenthal, General Counsel at LegalZoom, and Ken Adams, newly what? What do you have a title?
Head of contracts.
Head of
at
contracts.
Pulse.
That's right.
Great. At
What a
Pulse. So
concept.
you actually work for Pulse, not LegalZoom, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, congratulations, and I look forward to seeing how this develops. And thanks again to both of you for taking the time.
No,
It's
thank
been
you.
my pleasure, Bob.
Thanks again to Chas Rampenthal, General Counsel at LegalZoom, and Ken Adams, now Head of Contracts at LegalZoom, for joining us today. Thanks also to the sponsors who keep this show running. And as always, thanks to Ben Ambrogi for producing and editing the show. That's it for this week. This is Bob Ambrogi.